Amara Johnson used to believe that success could protect her, that if she worked twice as hard, stayed twice as honest, and forgave twice as quickly, the world would finally give her the safety she had spent her whole life chasing. But she was wrong, because on the night she stood beneath the glittering skylines of Atlanta, her hand wrapped around the arm of the man the world called a visionary, Amara had no idea she was celebrating at the edge of a cliff. And when she finally fell, everyone she thought she could trust would be standing on the other side, watching her crash. If stories like this keep you hooked, stories of betrayal, power, ambition, and women who rise from the ashes, make sure to like this story, leave a comment about your favorite moments so far, and follow the channel so you don't miss the chapters ahead. Now, let's begin. Amara Johnson had become the name whispered reverently in Atlanta's booming tech circles. The kind of woman who stepped into a boardroom and made executives twice her age adjust their posture. A forensic accountant with razor-sharp intuition, she could read a spreadsheet the way musicians read music, finding melodies in numbers, scandals in shadows, patterns no one else noticed. Viridian Health Tech, once a fledgling startup, had exploded under her guidance, and every investor deck, every press interview, every glossy magazine spread praised her brilliance. But the spotlight never lingered on her for long. It always slid back toward the man at her side, Logan Hale, the company's charismatic CEO, and the other half of what the media called the golden couple of Atlanta tech. Together they looked like the future. Logan, with his polished smile and boyish swagger, and Amara, elegant and composed, a black woman who had threaded her way through an industry that rarely made space for her. Their photos, him in tailored navy, her radiant in emerald satin, filled Instagram feeds after every gala, every innovation summit, every charity breakfast. A power couple reimagining healthcare, Forbes named them, the brains and the vision. But headlines have a way of flattening truth, and glamour has a way of hiding cracks. On the night Viridian unveiled its newest AI-driven health platform, the ballroom of the Peachtree Grand shimmered like a dream. Spotlights danced across the crowd of investors, politicians, and celebrities flown in to witness the company's next leap forward. Amara floated from conversation to conversation, her smile warm but controlled. She'd spent weeks auditing the back end of the new system, ensuring the data models were ethical and transparent. She believed in this work. She believed in the mission. She believed, perhaps too fully, in Logan. She found him across the room, effortlessly commanding attention. His laugh rose above the music, confident and magnetic, and people leaned toward him as if drawn by gravity. When he saw her, his smile softened. "There she is," he said, wrapping an arm around her waist. "The real genius of the night." Compliments from Logan always felt like charm wrapped around possession. Like his praise was another way of reminding the room that she was his. But the cameras loved moments like this, and so did the investors who adored the idea of a perfect partnership steering their millions. Amara brushed aside the faint unease curling in her stomach. She was used to this balance, to shining but never too brightly. When Logan led her on stage near the end of the presentation, she thought it was for a closing statement. Instead, the screens behind them illuminated with photographs, moments from their relationship captured like a curated documentary. The crowd gasped as Logan sank to one knee. "Amara Johnson," he declared, voice smooth as velvet, "you are the brilliance behind this company, the anchor of my life, and the woman I want beside me forever. Will you marry me?" The ballroom erupted. Applause, camera flashes, cheers. Amara stood frozen for a single heartbeat, caught between shock, joy, and a strange, hollow fear she couldn't name. But everyone was watching. Everyone expected the perfect answer from the perfect woman in the perfect couple. So she smiled, nodded, and let Logan slip the glittering ring onto her trembling hand. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that behind the applause, behind the champagne toasts, behind the carefully staged celebration, Her downfall had already begun. Someone had already placed the first knife between her ribs. And soon, the world that celebrated her tonight would be the same world that demanded her ruin. Amara always trusted numbers more than people. Numbers didn't lie. They didn't flatter or betray or change their tone depending on who else was in the room. They told the truth with brutal clarity, so when the truth turned against her, it felt like the world itself had shifted beneath her feet. It began with a whisper in the spreadsheets. A single line item buried in the monthly reports from Viridian's community clinic division. Billing codes for services that should never have existed. One incorrect entry could be a clerical error. Two could be a glitch. But dozens? Across clinics that already fought for every dollar of funding? No, this wasn't a mistake. Someone had crafted these numbers intentionally, like a surgeon making invisible incisions. Amara leaned back in her swivel chair, the office lights flickering against the glass walls of Viridian's Atlanta headquarters. It was early, too early for anyone else to notice she hadn't slept. Her pulse tapped against her collarbone, steady but urgent. She knew what anomalies like these could mean: fraud, misconduct, federal violations. She also knew exactly how Logan would react if she even whispered the word audit. He hated anything that slowed momentum, but she had built her career on integrity, not convenience. She uploaded a draft report and walked toward Logan's office, the hall silent except for the rhythmic hum of the servers. She expected to find him prepping for a breakfast meeting, practicing that half smile he used in front of cameras. Instead, his door was closed, a rarity for a man who thrived on being accessible. And from inside came a sharp, muffled voice she recognized instantly. Chelsea Rivera. Amara paused. She shouldn't eavesdrop. She wouldn't, until she heard her own name. "She's asking too many questions," Chelsea was saying, voice strained. "If she keeps digging—" "She won't," Logan replied, calm in the way only guilty men could be. "I've got a plan." A plan. About her. Something cold slid down Amara's spine. Before she could move, footsteps echoed behind her. The head of operations, followed by two board members, approached with stiff smiles and hollow greetings. She stepped aside, letting them pass, watching as they entered Logan's office without knocking. A meeting she hadn't been told about. Something was wrong. Back at her desk, she tried to steady her breathing, tried to convince herself she was overreacting. Logan had been under pressure. Maybe Chelsea was just anxious. Maybe Amara was tired. Maybe the numbers weren't what she thought. But then her email notification chimed. Subject line: urgent, executive audit review. She opened it and felt her stomach drop. She was being summoned to a boardroom meeting she hadn't requested, with a tone that felt like judgment dressed as professionalism. When she arrived, the atmosphere was suffocating. Every board member sat stone-faced. Logan stood at the head of the table, expressions soft with concern, but eyes too bright, too rehearsed. "Amara," he began gently, "we've found something troubling." He clicked a remote, and the screens behind him flickered to life. Her name appeared on forged documents. Reports she had never touched, signatures she had never signed, spreadsheets altered to show money flowing exactly where it shouldn't. Line after line, all pointing to her. "These were submitted under your login credentials," Logan said, voice heavy with disappointment. "We had no idea you were struggling." Struggling. The word struck her like a slap. "I didn't create these," Amara said, forcing her voice steady. "Someone manipulated the data. I need access to the server logs." "The logs are corrupted," one board member replied, not meeting her gaze. "How convenient." Amara turned to Logan, her fiancé, her partner, the man who once told her she was the moral compass of the company. "You know I would never do this." Logan swallowed. His voice cracked perfectly, like an actor hitting his mark. "I thought I knew you." The betrayal was so smooth, so expertly performed, that several board members shifted uncomfortably. Chelsea stood in the corner, face pale but lips pressed into a thin line, as if holding a secret between her teeth. The words that followed cut deeper than any accusation. Effective immediately, you are placed on administrative leave pending federal review. Administrative leave, a euphemism for exile. A security guard entered, hands clasped politely but firmly. Miss Johnson, we'll escort you to your office. She felt her world fracture. She walked the hallways she had once ruled, passing employees who stared with quiet pity or barely disguised suspicion. Her reflection in the glass walls looked unfamiliar, small, shaken, framed by fluorescent lights instead of spotlight shimmer. In her office, she packed her belongings with numb hands, photos, notebooks, her mother's prayer card. She placed her ID badge on the desk, its barcode suddenly meaningless. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Turn on the news. When she did, she nearly collapsed. Logan stood outside Viridian headquarters, looking solemn, Chelsea by his side. Cameras flashed as he spoke into microphones with impeccable sincerity. "We are devastated," he said. "Amara was like family, but no one is above ethical responsibility." Chelsea rested her hand lightly on his arm, as if offering comfort. The caption read, "CEO Logan Hale addresses fraud committed by fiancé and senior accountant Amara Johnson." Fraud. Fiancé. Her name now bound to a crime she didn't commit. Her legs trembled beneath her. This wasn't an ambush. It was an execution, staged with precision. And the worst part wasn't Logan's quiet betrayal. It was the realization that the man who had once promised her forever had started planning her downfall long before she ever questioned the numbers. Everything she trusted, her career, her reputation, her love, had turned against her in a single day. And the world wasn't done taking. By the time Amara stepped out of Viridian's glass tower for the last time, the world had already decided who she was. Not a pioneer, not a visionary forensic accountant, not the woman who helped build one of Atlanta's fastest-growing health tech empires. No, within hours she had become something far smaller and far uglier. She had become a headline. Her phone buzzed non-stop as she walked across the parking lot, a numbness spreading through her limbs like frostbite. She didn't want to look. She didn't want to know. But one preview notification, bold and merciless, flashed across her screen. Hashtag Amara the Fraud is trending. Her heart faltered. One hashtag, 5 words. And suddenly, years of sacrifice dissolved like sugar in hot water. She sank into the back seat of the lift she'd ordered, her hands trembling. The driver glanced at her through the mirror with the kind of polite curiosity people use when they're trying to figure out whether they've seen you before. And then he realized he had. "Hey," he said softly, "aren't you?" She turned her face toward the window, forcing her voice not to break. "Please just drive." He didn't push. But she could feel his eyes flicking back to the mirror, the way people do when they've discovered they're transporting a scandal. Her phone kept vibrating. Messages, tags, news alerts. Against her better judgment, she opened Twitter. The top trending topic, hashtag Amara the Fraud second, hashtag Viridian Scandal. Third, hashtag Logan Hale Speaks. She tapped the hashtag with the dread of someone opening a wound. The feed exploded with strangers' verdicts. Another corporate scammer exposed. She probably only got the job because they needed diversity optics. Logan's too smart to let something this big slip past him. She looks guilty. You can see it in her eyes. The last one accompanied a photo, her photo, taken as she walked out of the building with security. The camera had caught the exact moment her composure cracked, her lips trembling, her eyes wide with disbelief. And because the internet had no mercy, the image had already become a meme. When HR shows up with receipts. Me when I realized the free trial ended. That face you make when you get caught. Some laughed, some scolded, some tore apart her resume, insisting a black woman could never truly have earned such a high-ranking position on merit alone. That she must have been a token, a mistake, an opportunist who finally slipped. The cruelty poured through the screen like acid. And Logan, oh Logan, wasn't just the source of the fire, he was feeding it. Clips of his press statement spread across TikTok. Logan standing in a navy suit, voice trembling just enough to seem human, eyes shining with manufactured pain. Amara was someone I loved and trusted, he said. But this blindsided us all. Viridian will cooperate with federal authorities to ensure justice is served. Chelsea stood behind him, strategically angled in the camera frame, her expression a careful blend of worry and professional calm. She wore the same shade of lipstick Amara had once recommended to her. In the comments below the clip, people debated, "He looks so hurt. Poor man, imagine your fiancé betraying you and your company." Chelsea seems so supportive. What a queen! Amara stared at the screen, her pulse hammering so loudly she thought she might faint. The driver clicked the radio on to fill the silence, and there, just to twist the knife, came a breaking news alert. Viridian Health Tech CEO Logan Hale spoke out today regarding allegations that senior accountant Amara Johnson falsified federal billing reports. Sources say investigators are already examining evidence provided by Hale himself. She pressed a hand to her forehead. It felt like her skull was splitting. "Can you turn that off?" she whispered. The driver hesitated. "Oh, sure, sorry." As the car pulled into the quiet neighborhood where she rented a small townhouse, her phone rang. The caller ID made her chest ache. M-O-M. Her mother's voice was trembling before Amara even answered. "Baby, what happened? People from church keep calling me. The pastor said, he said it's best if you don't attend Sunday service this week." Amara closed her eyes, swallowing the rising heat of humiliation. "Mama, I didn't do anything." "I know," her mother said quickly. Too quickly. "I know you, Amara. But the news, Lord, the news is saying terrible things. And your Aunt Patrice has been posting on Facebook again. And you know how she gets stirred up." "Please," Amara whispered, "please stop telling people anything. Just stay off social media for now." Her mother exhaled shakily. "Do you need me to come stay with you?" She almost said yes. She almost let herself crumble. But something inside her, some thin strand of pride, held firm. "No, I just need a little time." After the call, she stepped out of the car and walked toward her front door, as if wading through thick mud. Cameras weren't outside yet, thank God, but they would be soon. Scandals like this were oxygen to the media. Inside, her townhouse felt smaller than ever. She collapsed onto the couch, dropping her phone onto the coffee table. It buzzed again, and again, and again. She didn't touch it. Instead, she leaned forward, elbows on her knees, breathing carefully, trying to anchor herself against a reality that was crushing her. Her mind kept replaying the boardroom, Logan's voice, Chelsea's pale face, the falsified documents. The betrayal was so sharp, so total, she could barely think. But mixed inside the pain was something else. A spark, a question, a promise. If they were willing to destroy her this completely, what were they so desperate to hide? And why did Logan look so certain that the world would take his side? The hashtag Amara the Fraud might have buried her reputation for now. But Amara Johnson had built her life on truth. And the truth, ugly, dangerous, buried deep, was about to fight its way to the surface. The days after the scandal broke moved like thick, choking smoke. Slow, suffocating, impossible to escape. Amara barely remembered sleeping. She barely remembered eating. What she remembered were the voices. Reporters shouting questions from the sidewalk. Relatives calling with forced sympathy. Strangers online constructing elaborate fantasies about her greed and downfall. But the worst voice was the one in her head. The one whispering that maybe it would be easier to give up. By the third day, she sat in a polished downtown law office, facing 3 attorneys whose suits looked more expensive than her entire living room. They examined her like she was a risky investment, calculating whether she was worth saving. "Miss Johnson," the lead attorney began, fingers steepled, "you're facing serious federal charges. wire fraud, healthcare fraud, falsifying government records. It's not looking good. Amara clenched her hands in her lap. I didn't do any of this. The attorney exhaled gently, almost pitying. Intent doesn't matter if the evidence says otherwise. And right now, all the evidence points to you. All the evidence Logan created. All the evidence she wasn't allowed to challenge. Another attorney slid a folder across the table. Here's the plea deal the U.S. Attorney's Office is offering. If you sign, you avoid prison time. Amara stared at the document. Each sentence felt like a physical blow. Admission of guilt. Lifetime ban from working in finance or healthcare. Restitution payments she could never afford. Mandatory probation. Her throat tightened. You want me to confess to crimes I didn't commit? We want you to avoid prison, the attorney said, leaning forward. Ms. Johnson, federal prison is not, he paused delicately, a place you want to be. Amara's pulse thundered. And Logan? What happens to him? He's cooperating, the attorney said matter-of-factly. His legal exposure seems minimal. These actions all happened under your login. Her vision blurred. Cooperating. Logan. The same man who used to kiss her forehead in the morning and whisper, "We're unstoppable, Amara." Now he was cooperating to save himself. She swallowed back a tremor. What if I fight? The attorneys exchanged glances, the kind people share when someone says something naive. Let me be brutally honest, the lead attorney said. Emotionally ruined? She already was. Professionally ruined? Logan had handled that for her. Financially ruined? She was one late payment away. The attorney slid a pen toward her. Sign the deal. Start rebuilding your life. Rebuilding. A polite word for erasing everything she had worked for. Her hand trembled as she picked up the pen. If she signed, the noise would stop. The humiliation would fade. The headlines would shift. Maybe her family could walk through the world again without being asked uncomfortable questions. Maybe she could disappear quietly, find a small accounting job somewhere no one knew her name. Her initials hovered above the first line, and then she heard it. Her mother's voice inside her mind, from a memory years ago, sitting at the kitchen table after a difficult school day. Baby, the world will tell you you're wrong even when you're right, but you don't let anyone rewrite your truth. Her hand froze. Truth. Amara set the pen down. I'm not signing, she whispered. The attorneys stiffened. One closed his laptop sharply. Miss Johnson, the lead attorney said, tone cooling. This is the best deal you will ever get. Then I'll find someone who believes in justice more than convenience, she said quietly. His expression hardened. Fighting this will destroy you. No, Amara replied, standing on legs that felt like glass. Logan already tried to destroy me. I won't finish the job for him. Outside, the sun was too bright, the city too loud, her thoughts too heavy. She walked aimlessly until she ended up at a community center she used to volunteer at, an unplanned pilgrimage to a place where she had once felt safe. Inside, kids played in the after-school program, their laughter echoing off the walls. One little girl with braids looked up at her and smiled shyly, and that simple human warmth nearly brought Amara to her knees. How could she surrender in a world where people still believed in goodness? How could she confess to stealing from clinics that served families just like hers? A gentle voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. You look like someone carrying too much. Amara turned to see an older woman, the center's director, approaching with kind eyes. I'm managing, Amara lied. The woman gave her a knowing look. There is power in standing your ground, even when the ground is shaking. For a moment, Amara couldn't breathe, because that was exactly what she was doing, standing her ground on a fault line. When she finally returned home that evening, exhausted but resolute, her phone buzzed with a message from her new public defender, Nadine Holt, a blunt, relentless attorney known for taking impossible cases. The message read, I heard you fired the other firm. Good. If you want to fight, I'll fight with you. Meet me tomorrow. Bring everything Logan ever gave you, especially the lies. Amara stared at the screen, her fear shifting into something sharper, something stronger. If Logan Hale wanted a war, he had chosen the wrong woman to underestimate. Because she wasn't surrendering. Not now, not ever. The first time Amara saw Judge Ethan Walker, he wasn't on a news segment or in some viral clip dissecting corporate crime. He was a man in a black robe, walking into a courtroom that already felt like a funeral for her life. "All rise." The words reverberated through the high-ceilinged federal courtroom, bouncing off marble and dark wood. Amara stood with everyone else, hands cold around the worn edge of the defense table. Her heart pounded so loudly, she was sure the microphones could pick it up. She had imagined this moment 100 different ways, each more terrifying than the last. Orange jumpsuit, shackles, headlines waiting outside. Amara Johnson arrives in court. Instead, she wore a simple navy dress in borrowed calm. The only thing she owned in that room was the truth, and right now it felt like the weakest asset on the table. Judge Ethan Walker took his seat behind the bench, his presence instantly shifting the air. He was not what she expected. Younger than most federal judges she'd seen on TV, early 40s at most, with sharp features and clear blue eyes that swept the room with quiet intensity. There was no theatrical gavel slam, no dramatic sigh, just a measured stillness, as if he were taking stock of every person, every detail, every unsaid motive. He glanced at the docket. "United States versus Amara Johnson," he read. His gaze lifted, landing on her. For a fraction of a second, their eyes met. She braced herself to see what everyone else had shown her in the last week. Disgust, suspicion, voyeuristic curiosity. Instead, his expression didn't change. No softening, no hardening. Just curiosity, clinical and focused, as though she were not a villain or a victim, but a question. Her public defender, Nadine Holt, nudged her gently. "Breathe," she murmured. "He's one of the good ones." Good ones. The phrase meant little to Amara now. Logan had once been one of the good ones too. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Daniel Klein, rose first. His suit was immaculate, his confidence sharpened by ambition. This case was a ladder, and Amara could already see him planning how to climb it. "Your Honor," Klein began, "the government is prepared to proceed with the pretrial motions. This is a straightforward case of egregious healthcare fraud committed by the defendant, Ms. Johnson, acting as senior financial authority within Viridian Health Tech." Nadine stood. "Objection to the word straightforward unless counsel has suddenly become clairvoyant." A few chuckles rippled through the gallery. Judge Walker's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but not disapproving either. "Mr. Klein," he said evenly, "let's stick to facts, not adjectives. Continue." Klein cleared his throat. "Yes, Your Honor, the evidence clearly shows—" "That's another adjective," the judge cut in. "Let's see if we can get to the actual evidence sometime today, shall we?" This time, the laughter was less restrained. Klein's jaw tightened. Amara watched, something unfamiliar blooming in her chest. Not hope exactly, that would be dangerous, but a thin thread of curiosity. Maybe Nadine was right. Maybe this judge wasn't here to play along with a performance. Klein laid out the prosecution's claims: tampered billing records, falsified submissions to federal health programs, stolen millions. Every word felt like a stone landing on her chest. Her login credentials, her digital signature, her access. They had taken the tools she used to protect the company and turned them into weapons. Ms. Johnson's actions directly harmed vulnerable patients in underserved communities, Klein concluded. The evidence of her exclusive access to these altered records is overwhelming. When he said exclusive, Nadine's pen tapped sharply against her legal pad. Judge Walker looked down at his notes. "Overwhelming, you say?" His gaze shifted to Nadine. "Ms. Holt, your response?" Nadine rose, the embodiment of controlled fire. "Your Honor, The government is asking this court to ignore some rather glaring problems. Logs that conveniently went missing during a crucial period. Server malfunctions that somehow affected only the data implicating executives other than my client. And evidence gathered almost entirely by Veridian's own legal team before the FBI ever got involved. Veridian's internal investigation is robust, Klein snapped. Robust is a generous term for whatever Logan Hale scribbled on a whiteboard between PR interviews. Nadine shot back. Ethan Walker's gaze sharpened. Ms. Holt, watch your tone regarding non-parties to this case, for now. The pause after "for now" hung in the air like a threat, and not to Amara. He turned to Klein. Mr. Klein, explain the corrupted server logs. Klein hesitated. Your Honor, the company's IT department reported— I've read their report, Walker interrupted. I'm asking you, do you have an independent forensic analysis of these logs? Or are you relying entirely on data filtered through Veridian's internal team? Klein shifted. We are in the process of obtaining a federal forensic review, but the preliminary— So the answer is no, the judge said. You do not yet have independent verification. Silence settled. Amara felt her lungs expand, just a little. Furthermore, Walker continued, flipping through a thick file, I see multiple witnesses whose testimonies align rather conveniently with Veridian's preferred narrative, many of whom were recently promoted, including Ms. Chelsea Rivera, now serving as CFO. The name sliced through Amara like a blade. Your Honor, Klein protested, promotions are irrelevant. Patterns are rarely irrelevant, Walker replied calmly, particularly when those receiving promotions are also those shaping the story. He looked at Amara again, just for a heartbeat. Let me be clear, he said. This court is not here to rubber stamp an indictment just because it looks neat in a press release. If Ms. Johnson is guilty, the evidence should withstand scrutiny. If she is not, then I will not permit this court to be weaponized as a stage prop. The words struck something deep within her, a place so bruised she hadn't realized it was still alive. No one had spoken about her in those terms in weeks, not as a spectacle, not as a symbol, as a person whose fate required scrutiny. Klein tried to recover. Your Honor, with respect, this case is about the defendant's misconduct, not corporate politics. This case is about the truth, Walker said quietly, and I expect the government to pursue that truth, not simply the most convenient version of it. He turned back to Nadine. Ms. Holt, you've requested expanded discovery, including internal communications between Veridian executives and federal investigators. I'm inclined to grant that, Amara inhaled sharply. Nadine squeezed her arm under the table, a fleeting sign of shared victory. Klein's voice rose. Your Honor, that is an extraordinary intrusion into privileged corporate communications. It is an extraordinary accusation, the judge replied. Millions of dollars in alleged fraud, a public spectacle, and a defendant whose entire life has been dismantled. Extraordinary accusations justify extraordinary scrutiny. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room, settling momentarily on the journalists in the back row, their pens scribbling furiously. And let me say one more thing, he added. This court does not try people based on trends, hashtags, or viral narratives. I don't care what Twitter thinks of Ms. Johnson. I care what the evidence proves. The words washed over Amara like water over a wound, stinging, cleansing, almost unbearable in their relief. The hearing proceeded, but her mind stayed anchored to one startling realization. Someone in power, someone white, someone male, was refusing to let the world's snap judgment be the final word on her life. She didn't trust it. She didn't dare. But as she glanced up at Judge Ethan Walker, watching him dismantle lazy assumptions with surgical questions, a fragile thought edged into her heart. Maybe, just maybe, the system wasn't entirely rigged. Maybe somewhere inside its cold machinery, there was one person willing to see her not as a headline or a hashtag, but as a woman who might, just might, be telling the truth. The hearing with Judge Walker bought Amara something she hadn't felt in weeks: oxygen. Not hope, not yet, but the faintest loosening of the invisible hand around her throat. For a moment, she could breathe. For a moment, she could imagine a world in which she wasn't already convicted by public opinion. But outside the courthouse doors, the oxygen thinned again. A sea of reporters surged toward her like a tide. Questions, flashes, shouts. Amara, did you falsify the billing records? Do you blame Logan Hale for turning on you? Is it true Chelsea Rivera warned the board about you? Are you hiding anything? Nadine shielded her, ushering her into the waiting car. But even there, safety was an illusion. Her phone vibrated nonstop. Messages, mentions, links. The war on social media hadn't slowed. It had escalated. She opened her notifications and the world crashed over her again. Screenshots from the hearing were trending. Photos of her standing behind the defense table, jaw tense, eyes dark, shoulders squared, were being dissected with microscopic cruelty. She looks angry, that's guilt. She looks scared, that's guilt. She looks too calm, that's guilt. There was no correct way to exist, not for her. A clip of Judge Walker questioning the prosecution had gone viral too, but the comments twisted the narrative. She must have charmed him. There it is, pretty privilege. He's biased, she's manipulating him. They didn't even agree on the insult. They didn't need to. The goal was never accuracy, it was blood. And then came the worst corner of the internet, the ones who didn't bother hiding their racism. Diversity hire strikes again. Affirmative action queen. Knew she'd pull everyone down with her. Amara stared at the screen until her vision blurred. She'd spent her life trying to outrun stereotypes, to defy them so thoroughly her competence would become an armor. But the armor was cracking, and the arrows kept coming. At home, the war took on a different shape. Her mother called again, voice trembling. Amara, I know you're fighting. I know you're strong. But baby, your uncle says the congregation is asking questions. He thinks maybe you should come forward with a dash. A confession? Amara asked sharply. No, not that. Just some kind of statement. Something to calm people down. They don't understand what's happening. People never understood. They consumed. They speculated. They demanded apologies from the wrong people. She pinched the bridge of her nose. Mama, I can't explain what I didn't do. Her mother's sigh was heavy with fear, disguised as love. Then just be careful. People can be cruel when they're scared. Cruel wasn't the word. Cruel was too simple. This was annihilation. Her brother called next. Sis, I'm blocking people as fast as I can, but they keep coming. Someone posted our address in the comments. I reported it, but her chest tightened. Marcus, stop engaging. Please, don't get pulled into this. Too late, he muttered. Someone tagged me in a video calling you a sociopath. Her hands shook. I'm so sorry. Don't you apologize, he snapped, voice breaking through its usual calm. You hear me? Don't you dare apologize for what he did to you. He meant Logan. He always meant Logan. But Amara carried the guilt anyway, as if she should have seen it coming, as if she'd been responsible for letting a serpent into her life. That night, sleep refused to come. The townhouse creaked with a loneliness that felt predatory. Every shadow seemed sharper. The house too quiet, her thoughts too loud. She opened her laptop, not to work, not to scroll, but to research. She dove into legal precedents, forensic case studies, server log reconstruction methods, anything to feel useful, anything to remind herself she wasn't the caricature the world had made of her. But at 2:17 a.m., exhaustion finally caught up. She let her forehead rest against the table and exhaled shakily. A notification pinged. She almost ignored it until she saw the sender. Logan Hale posted a new statement. Against every warning her instincts screamed, she clicked. The video opened to Logan's face, soft lighting, concerned expression, his voice low with manufactured heartbreak. I'm devastated, he said. Amara was the last person I ever expected this from. But as CEO, I have a duty to protect Veridian, to protect our clients, to protect our investors. I hope she finds peace in telling the truth. It wasn't what he said that destroyed her. It was the mask of sincerity, the performance, the way he spoke her name like he still owned it, the way every lie dripped with just enough emotion to make strangers believe him. The comments were already flooding in. Logan is such a class act. He's hurting, you can hear it. She doesn't deserve a man like him. A hollow laugh slipped from her throat, half agony, half disbelief. He was dismantling her life in public with the same tenderness he used to dismantle her doubts in private. And people adored him for it. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Nadine. Saw the video. Don't watch it again. Get some rest. Tomorrow we fight. Tomorrow. A simple word. But after the chaos of the past week, it felt almost like a promise. She closed her laptop. Let the darkness settle. Let the grief simmer into something sturdier. War was being waged in the comments. War was being waged in her home. But the battlefield wasn't just social media or the courthouse. The real war was inside her, between the woman who wanted to crawl into silence and the woman who refused to be buried alive. And only one of them could survive what was coming next. The email arrived at 3:42 a.m., a time when only grief, guilt, and ghosts usually reached out. Amara was awake, not because she wanted to be, but because sleep had become a stranger. She sat curled on the couch, wrapped in a blanket she couldn't feel, staring at the TV playing some infomercial she wasn't watching. Everything inside her felt raw, like an open wound exposed to cold air. When her laptop chimed, she expected another article, another cruel comment, another notification dragging her name through mud. Instead, the subject line chilled her. I know what Logan did. See, for a long moment, she didn't open it. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears, a warning and a hope tangled together. Eventually, with trembling fingers, she clicked. A short message appeared. You don't know me, but I know you're innocent. I know because I saw him do this before. Not to you, to someone else. If you want to talk, meet me tomorrow at 5 p.m. at the old coffee shop on Auburn Avenue. Sit at the corner table. I'll find you. Come alone. Amara stared at the words until they blurred. A trap? A lead? A lifeline? She forwarded the email to Nadine, who replied within minutes. We're going, but you're not going alone. The next afternoon, they arrived at the worn brick cafe tucked between a bookstore and a barber shop. It was the kind of place where old men played chess in the corner and students sipped lattes they couldn't afford. A place that smelled like cinnamon, ink, and memory. Amara chose the corner table, as instructed. Nadine sat several tables behind, disguised under a baseball cap, pretending to flip through a newspaper. Every time the bell above the door chimed, Amara's pulse spiked. She kept glancing at the window, at the street, at the door, half expecting Logan to walk in with a smug smile, half expecting the email to be nothing but a cruel joke. Then a figure appeared in the doorway, a man in his late 30s, thin but sharp-eyed, with the jittery alertness of someone who'd spent years looking over his shoulder. He scanned the cafe, spotted her, and approached cautiously. Amara Johnson? He asked, voice low. Yes. He slid into the seat across from her, palms flat on the table as if anchoring himself. My name is Carlos Mejia. She blinked. The name tugged at her memory. He looked familiar, not from news, not from her life, but from the corner of company photos, old all-staff meetings, award ceremonies. You used to work at Veridian, she said. Carlos nodded. Used to, until I learned better. There was bitterness in his smile. Pain aged into something sharper. He leaned closer. I know what you're going through. Because Logan did the same thing to someone before you. A data analyst named Priya Patel. Amara's breath stilled. What happened to her? She found discrepancies in a pilot program, the kind that could have triggered an audit. She questioned Logan. 2 weeks later, data showed she altered records. Her access logs were compromised. She was fired, blacklisted, lost her visa sponsorship. She left the country. The words hit like blows. I saved what I could, Carlos continued. Emails, meeting memos, early versions of altered documents. Enough to show a pattern. Logan always targeted the smartest ones, the ones who might uncover what he was doing. First Priya, now you. Amara felt nausea rise. If you knew this, why didn't you come forward sooner? Carlos's eyes softened with shame. Because I was scared. Because Logan was powerful. Because I needed my job. Pick whichever excuse makes me sound least pathetic. He sat back, voice thickening. But when I saw your face on the news, I saw Priya all over again. And I realized silence makes me part of the machine that destroys people like you. A storm of emotions swirled inside Amara. Gratitude, grief, anger, validation, and the unbearable weight of knowing she had not been the first. What exactly do you have? She asked. Carlos pulled out a small envelope. Proof Logan manipulated internal compliance reports. Proof he pushed the IT team to create alternate logs when needed. Proof he framed Priya and laid the groundwork to frame you. Her fingers tightened around the envelope. It felt heavy, far heavier than its size. Carlos's voice dropped. There's something else. Logan bragged once, drunk at an executive retreat, that power wasn't about leading people. It was about choosing who gets blamed when things go wrong. Amara swallowed hard. Why tell me now? Because you still have a chance, he said. Priya didn't. I couldn't save her. Maybe I can help save you. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Two strangers connected by the wreckage of the same man. Then Carlos stood, hands shaking slightly. Be careful. Logan ruins people for sport. He's not afraid of crossing lines, and he's not done with you yet. He walked out before she could thank him. Across the cafe, Nadine hurried over, breath tight with urgency. Did he give you anything? Amara lifted the envelope. Nadine's eyes widened. If this is real, this could be the crack in Viridian's armor. Amara stared at the door Carlos had exited through, her heart pounding with something she hadn't felt in weeks. Not hope, not yet, but a shift, a tremor, a warning to Logan that the ghosts he'd buried weren't as quiet as he thought. And now, one of them had chosen to haunt him back. Chelsea Rivera had always been the girl who survived, the girl who hustled, adapted, smiled politely, and swallowed her pride when necessary. She had learned early that the world wasn't built for women like her, women with ambition and no safety net. So she built her own scaffolding, carefully, quietly, strategically. But no one teaches you what to do when the scaffolding begins to sway beneath your feet. It started subtle, Logan canceling their check-ins without explanation, brushing off her questions with clipped answers. He stopped introducing her as my CFO at investor mixers, and instead said vague things like, Chelsea's been helping with operations. The demotion was small enough to be deniable, yet sharp enough to cut. At first, she tried to rationalize it. He was stressed. The company was under scrutiny. The board was panicking. Anyone would be tense. But then came the documents. New spreadsheets appearing on her desk with altered figures she didn't recognize. Email chains she'd never seen before. Requests from Logan typed in rushed tones. Just sign this. We don't have time for a full review. Need this approved ASAP for optics. It was the same tone he must have used with Amara. The same urgency. The same push toward a cliff disguised as a corporate duty. Chelsea didn't sleep for 2 nights straight. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Amara's face on the news. Frightened, betrayed, alone. A face Chelsea had once looked at with envy, then with guilt, and now with something closer to horror, because she finally understood. She wasn't Logan's partner or his protected asset. She was the next in line. The realization hit her while staring at a spreadsheet at 2 a.m., illuminated only by the cold glow of her laptop. The numbers didn't align. The formula had been altered. The timestamps were too perfect, too intentionally placed. Someone was building a new narrative. And this time, the fingerprint trail pointed to her. Chelsea's stomach twisted. She pushed her chair back, stood abruptly, and paced the office. It was silent, sterile, the same space she once felt honored to occupy. Now it felt like a cage. Her breath quickened. Logan had done it once. To Amara. To Priya before her. To God knows who else. Why would he hesitate to do it again? She grabbed her purse, phone, and coat and fled into the night. The next morning, the board summoned her unexpectedly. She walked into the conference room, heart pounding. Logan sat at the head of the table, looking polished and perfect, as if the scandal had only polished his ego rather than threatened his career. "Chelsea," he said smoothly, "we need your cooperation with the auditors." Cooperation. The same word he had used publicly when discussing Amara. The word that translated to submit or be sacrificed. She swallowed. "I need legal counsel present." One board member raised an eyebrow. "Why would you need counsel if you've done nothing wrong?" Chelsea's nails dug into her palm. "Because mistakes can happen," she said delicately, "and I want to be prepared." Logan's smile tightened. "You sound paranoid. You sound dangerous," she thought. But instead she said, "I'm cautious." "Good," he replied. "We could use some of that." The meeting stretched painfully, filled with questions disguised as traps. When it ended, Logan walked her to the elevator, his hand resting lightly on her back. A gesture once comforting, now suffocating. "You seem tense," he murmured. "Everything okay?" Chelsea nodded with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just tired." "Tired people make mistakes," he said softly. Her heart stuttered. "I won't." "See that you don't." He stepped into the elevator, doors closing between them. His last smile lingered like poison. Chelsea turned away and walked briskly to the parking garage. Her hands trembled as she unlocked her car. Once inside, she let out a shaky breath and pulled out her phone. Her hands hovered. Who could she tell? Who would believe her? Not HR. They reported to Logan. Not the board. They wanted someone to blame. Not the media. They'd twist anything she said. This left one person. The woman who should have despised her. Chelsea typed Amara's name into her contacts. For weeks, she had stared at it, guilt eating her alive, but never dared to press call. Now, with her career and freedom hanging by a thread, dread and desperation forced her thumb downward. Amara answered on the third ring. "Hello?" Chelsea's heartbeat thundered in her ears. "Amara, it's me." A long, icy silence followed. Chelsea swallowed. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to talk to you. Please." "Why?" Amara's voice was calm, sharp, a blade wrapped in velvet. "Because Logan's doing it again," Chelsea whispered. "He's setting someone up, and this time, it's me." They met in the quiet back room of a community center, far from the glossy chaos of downtown Atlanta. The room smelled of old books and cleaning spray, a place untouched by corporate ambition, untouched by Logan's reach. Amara sat across from her, posture straight, eyes unreadable. Chelsea hated how small she felt under that gaze, how much she deserved to. But she forced herself to speak. "I helped him frame you," she said, voice cracking. "I told myself it was just office politics, that he wouldn't go as far as he did, that you'd be fine." Tears pricked her eyes. "I lied to myself, and I lied to you." Amara didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her silence was an interrogation. Chelsea took a trembling breath, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small flash drive. "This is everything I have. Emails, altered files, conversations, Logan's instructions, proof that he—" Her voice broke. "Proof that he never meant for you to survive this." Amara stared at the drive, her breath catching almost imperceptibly. "Why now?" Chelsea wiped her cheeks. "Because last night I found a folder, a new one, with doctored numbers and a digital trail leading straight to me. He's not just preparing for an audit. She swallowed hard. He's preparing a replacement. A long, weighted silence settled between them. Then Amara spoke, her voice quiet but resonant. "You were part of what destroyed my life." Chelsea nodded, sobbing. "I know, but you're also part of what can save it," Amara continued. "If what you say is true." Chelsea clung to the edge of the table. "It is." Amara took the flash drive, and for the first time since the scandal began, Chelsea saw something fierce in her eyes. Anger, yes, but also clarity, determination, fire. Logan Hale thought he had ended one woman and trapped another. But Chelsea realized, too late, Logan's greatest mistake wasn't underestimating them individually. It was underestimating what they could become together. By the time the federal agents finished scrolling through the files on Chelsea's flash drive and Carlos's envelope of evidence, the room felt charged, like the air just before a storm breaks. They sat around a battered conference table in a government office that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and stale air. On one side, Amara, Nadine, Chelsea, and Carlos. On the other, two federal prosecutors and three agents from a financial crimes task force. Between them lay printouts, screenshots, and timelines mapping out Logan Hale's carefully curated empire of lies. "This isn't just sloppy bookkeeping," one of the agents said, tapping a page with the back of his pen. "This is a symphony of fraud." Amara stared at the web of arrows drawn across the board, all converging toward one name: Logan's. It should have felt vindicating. Instead, it felt nauseating. Each red line represented lives upended, clinics underfunded, patients betrayed. Nadine pointed at an email chain Chelsea had provided. "Look here. Logan instructs IT to create backup logs for audits in case of discrepancies. That's coded language for fake receipts. And these entries," she flipped to another page, "correspond perfectly with the dates Priya flagged issues. Then with the dates Amara did." "So he's been using the same playbook for years," the lead prosecutor murmured. "Find the conscience in the room, let her do her job, then bury her with her own tools." Chelsea flinched. "We can't just chip away at this," Nadine said. "We have to break it open." The agent sitting opposite her leaned forward. "We might have a way. We've been monitoring rumors of an upcoming deal, a merger or asset transfer with a European firm. If Logan is planning an exit strategy, he'll need to move money, fast and quietly. That's when people like him make mistakes." Amara's chest tightened. "You think he's going to steal even more?" "I think he's going to try to hide what he already stole," the agent replied. "And if he's as arrogant as he looks on TV, he'll brag about it." "How do we prove it?" Amara asked. The agent's gaze shifted to Chelsea. "We set a trap, and Ms. Rivera invites him to walk into it." The plan felt like something out of a movie, but the fear was very real. Chelsea would reach out to Logan with a manufactured concern, say she was worried about exposure, about investigators getting too close. She'd propose meeting with offshore consultants who claimed they could make the remaining funds untraceable before regulators shut the door. What Logan wouldn't know was that those consultants were undercover federal agents, wired and ready. "And me?" Amara asked quietly. "You stay away from the meeting," Nadine said firmly. "If this blows up, I don't want them accusing you of entrapment. Besides, you have your own role." Amara raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" Nadine smiled grimly. "We're going to court to make sure everything we catch him doing can actually be used." Judge Ethan Walker's courtroom had never felt more like the eye of a storm. "Your Honor," Nadine began, standing with measured calm, "we are requesting judicial authorization for expanded surveillance and recording in connection with Mr. Logan Hale, CEO of Viridian Health Tech, to investigate suspected ongoing efforts to launder and conceal fraudulent funds." Klein, the prosecutor who had once smirked his way through blaming Amara, now looked decidedly uncomfortable from the government side of the aisle. He cleared his throat. "We concur, Your Honor." Walker raised an eyebrow. "That's a first. the government agreeing with the defense on an investigative request. I should mark my calendar. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the courtroom. His gaze sharpened. Miss Holt, what makes this necessary? Nadine gestured to the binder in front of her. We have credible evidence, Your Honor, that Mr. Hale has a pattern of orchestrating fraud and then manufacturing scapegoats. We now have proof from multiple former employees, including internal communications, where he directs the alteration of data and the fabrication of logs. Given the scale of the alleged misconduct, it is likely he'll attempt to move assets before this court can fully adjudicate the matter. Walker turned to Klein. And the government agrees? Klein nodded stiffly. Yes, Your Honor. The evidence recently presented suggests substantial, ongoing criminal risk that extends beyond Ms. Johnson's case. Walker's gaze flickered to Amara. No softness, no performative sympathy, just a clear acknowledgement that the tide was shifting. Very well, he said. The request for targeted surveillance and recording is granted, with appropriate limitations to protect non-involved parties. I expect detailed oversight, no fishing expeditions. His eyes fixed briefly on Klein. If you are going to catch Mr. Hale, you will do it cleanly. He paused, then added, and let the record reflect that this court will not tolerate the continued weaponization of justice for optics. If Mr. Hale is moving stolen funds while insisting on Ms. Johnson's guilt, I want that contradiction brought into the light. Amara's throat tightened. For the first time, the official transcript of this case contains something close to the truth. 2 nights later, Logan walked into a luxurious private room in a Buckhead hotel. Tailored suit immaculate, arrogance worn like cologne. Chelsea sat at the table, hands folded to hide their trembling. Across from them, 2 consultants waited, played by agents who looked exactly like the kind of men rich executives trusted with dirty secrets. Polished, discreet, fluent in the language of loopholes. Mr. Hale, one of them said, shaking his hand, we understand you have assets that need a new home before regulators get curious. Logan chuckled. Curiosity is the national hobby these days. But yes, I have funds tied up in ventures that may not survive the media's appetite for scandal. I'd prefer to relocate them before they get eaten alive. Hidden microphones captured every syllable. They discussed shell corporations, layered accounts, non-extradition jurisdictions. The consultants nudged. Logan bragged. Chelsea sat motionless, every muscle screaming, knowing that this conversation might be the one thing that saved her, and fully aware that if he sensed the trap, she'd be the first he dragged down with him. And Ms. Johnson? One agent asked casually. The one they say did all this. She a problem? Logan laughed, low and cruel. Amara? No. She'll be ruined long before anyone realizes she didn't mastermind this. That's the beauty of it. People will always believe the story that already fits their bias. Chelsea's blood ran cold. Besides, he continued, if the worst happens, I still have a nice, tidy trail of digital fingerprints on her and a few others. Easy to resurrect if necessary. Easy to resurrect. That was when the doors burst open. Federal agents, voices thundered. Hands where we can see them. Logan froze, shock flickering across his face for the first time in months. The consultants rose, badges flashing. Chelsea flinched back as agents swarmed the room, commanding, securing, recording. In the chaos, Logan's eyes snapped to her. Chelsea, he hissed, betrayal twisting his features. What did you do? Her heart hammered, but for the first time, she did not feel powerless. I stopped being your next fall girl, she said quietly. They cuffed him. Cameras recorded. Somewhere, someone would leak the footage. Somewhere, hashtags were already forming. But as Logan was led away, struggling to regain his composure, Amara wasn't there to see it. She was in Nadine's office with the television muted, watching the live feed as Logan's image, once polished and untouchable, flashed across the screen, wearing handcuffs instead of a spotlight. The headline read, Veridian CEO Logan Hale arrested in alleged fraud and money laundering scheme. Nadine exhaled slowly. There it is. Amara didn't smile. She didn't cheer. She just watched, hand pressed to the quiet ache in her chest, as the man who had authored her ruin was finally confronted by something bigger than his ego. Not karma, not fate, evidence, and a sting operation he never imagined the supporting characters in his story would dare to pull. Freedom didn't arrive like a sunrise. It didn't burst through clouds with trumpets or applause. It arrived quietly, folded into a stack of papers Nadine slid across her kitchen table at dawn. "Read it," Nadine said, voice rough from exhaustion and caffeine. Amara picked up the top page. Her eyes scanned the bold letters. Motion to dismiss all charges. United States v. Amara Johnson. Granted. For a moment, the words didn't register. They were marks on paper, symbols she'd studied her whole life, yet suddenly incomprehensible. Amara, Nadine's voice softened. You're free. Free. The word shattered something inside her. Weeks, no, months, of fear and humiliation and hatred and grief rose all at once, knocking the air from her lungs. She pressed a trembling hand to her chest, not trusting herself to speak. Nadine placed a steadying hand on her back. It's over. They can't come for you anymore. But that wasn't true. Because while the system had released her, the world hadn't. The moment the dismissal order became public, her phone flooded. Some messages were kind, most were not. People didn't know what to do with a woman who refused to fit their narrative, so she got off on a technicality. Still suspicious. Just because she didn't go to prison doesn't mean she's innocent. Bet the judge felt sorry for her. The comments gnawed at her like tiny, relentless teeth. Then there were the headlines. Logan Hale arrested in massive fraud scheme. Previously accused CFO Amara Johnson cleared. Cleared, not vindicated, not proven innocent. Cleared. A word that sounded like dusting off a stain, but not removing it. The internet moved quickly, too quickly. Logan's downfall became entertainment. The arrest footage replayed on TikTok with dramatic music edits. Memes called him Silicon Scammer. Influencers analyzed his body language. Podcasts speculated how deep the corruption went. And through it all, Amara's face appeared in the thumbnails. Haunted, tired, weaponized. Every time she saw her own expression frozen in those images, something inside her recoiled. Her name was no longer trending, but the scars of it still were. A week later, Nadine insisted they go to the courthouse to retrieve final documents. Amara dreaded walking through those doors again. She expected stares, whispers, pity. What she didn't expect was Judge Ethan Walker stepping out of his chambers just as they approached the exit. He paused, mid-stride. Miss Johnson, her heart stuttered. She told herself it was nerves, not the sound of his voice. Nadine nudged her gently. Go on. He's trying to talk to you. Amara stepped forward, unsure of the ground beneath her. Your Honor, she said carefully. Judge Walker's gaze softened. Just barely. His presence was still imposing, but without the robe, he looked almost human, almost approachable. I heard the news, he said. Congratulations on the dismissal. She nodded, swallowing hard. Thank you, you're Ethan, he corrected. At least outside the courtroom. Her pulse fluttered. Ethan, she echoed quietly. He studied her for a moment, not with pity, not with judgment, but with an unreadable curiosity, as if trying to understand the weight she was carrying. How are you holding up? He asked. It was such a simple question. Too simple. It broke something open. I don't know, she admitted. I thought I'd feel relieved. I thought I'd feel victorious, maybe. Instead, I feel like I'm walking around with pieces of myself I don't know how to put back. His expression shifted, deeper, almost pained. That's normal. What you went through, it leaves marks. Marks. Scars. Shadows that followed even when the sun was out. Freedom doesn't mean healing, Ethan said quietly. It just means you finally have the space to start. She didn't know why, but his words hit her harder than any headline had. Nadine coughed lightly. We should go, unless, Judge, you'd like to continue stealing my client for philosophical insights. A faint smile tugged at Ethan's lips. I won't keep her. I just wanted her to know something important. Amara tilted her head. What's that? You weren't believed quickly enough, he said, but you were right, and not everyone gets that recognition. He hesitated, then added with a softness she wasn't prepared for. You deserved better. Her chest tightened. Thank you. As for what comes next, his voice lowered. Once the remaining legal matters with Mr. Hale are resolved, I'd like to speak with you again. Outside of professional capacities. He cleared his throat. If you'd want that. A swirl of surprise and warmth fluttered through her. She didn't answer. Not yet. Not when her heart still felt like a fragile structure held together by tape. Instead, she said, maybe. Ethan nodded, accepting the ambiguity with grace. Take care of yourself, Amara. That night, alone in her townhouse, she stared at the dismissal order propped on her coffee table. She should have felt triumphant. She felt hollow, because freedom came with a price no one warned her about. She had escaped prison, but she was still trapped. Inside people's perceptions, inside her own memories, inside the echo of Logan's voice telling the world she was guilty. She walked to the mirror, touched her reflection, studied the woman looking back. She didn't recognize her. But then she thought of Carlos, of Chelsea, of Priya, wherever she was, of the trails of destruction Logan had left behind. She thought of Ethan's steady eyes. For the first time in months, she whispered something she almost believed. I'm still here, not untouched, not unscarred, but here. And survival, she realized, was a form of victory too. Love didn't sweep into Amara's life with violins and candlelight. It arrived in small, cautious gestures. A text sent after midnight, a shared coffee in a quiet shop, conversations that tiptoed along the line between professional and personal without quite crossing it. Weeks passed after the dismissal. Logan's name dominated headlines as the scope of his fraud unfolded. Chelsea's cooperation was praised. Carlos's evidence became part of a larger narrative about corporate greed and systemic failure. The world slowly shifted its gaze away from Amara, but Ethan did not. It started with an email. If you're open to it, he wrote, I'd like to talk sometime. Not as a judge, just as someone who saw you fight a system that almost swallowed you. She read it 3 times before replying. Coffee. Somewhere no one recognizes you. Or me. He suggested a small shop near Grant Park, far from downtown. No court staff, no reporters, no polished wood or marble, just chipped tables, cheap ceramic mugs, and sunlight spilling through old windows. He was already there when she arrived, jacket draped over the back of his chair, reading a paperback that looked worn at the edges. When he stood, he looked almost ordinary. No robe, no bench, just a man trying not to stare too intensely. Amara, he greeted, as if her name meant something more than a case file. Thank you for coming. She slid into the seat opposite him, suddenly aware of everything. The way her hands folded, the tilt of her chin, the unfamiliar flutter in her chest. This feels strange, she admitted. You mean illegal? He said dryly. She snorted. Ethically slippery, at least. Trust me, Ethan replied, his tone softening. If there were any active matters involving you, we wouldn't be here. The reassurance helped. A little. They talked. Not about the case, not exactly, but about the feeling of being watched, of having your worst moments captured and replayed, of trying to rebuild a life when search engines still clung to your name like a crime scene tag. He told her about the first time he'd prosecuted a white-collar defendant who walked away with a slap on the wrist because he was too valuable to imprison. How helpless that had made him feel. How determined it had made him to push harder the next time. You weren't a case to me, he said quietly. You were a test of whether this job means anything or if we're just dressing injustice up in Latin phrases and leather chairs. She held his gaze. And what did you decide? That you reminded me why I took the job in the first place. The words settled over her, dangerous and warm. They met again. and again, sometimes in coffee shops, sometimes walking in the park, sometimes sitting on a bench by the river, talking about things that had nothing to do with courts or scandals, books they loved, songs that carried them through hard nights, childhood stories they never told anyone, because no one ever cared enough to ask. Ethan listened in a way that made her feel seen, as a woman, not a victim, not a cautionary tale. She listened, too, as he confessed the loneliness that came with being the judge in every room, the way people stopped being honest around him once they knew what he did. For a while, the outside world faded until someone saw them. It was a blurry photo at first, taken from across the street. Amara and Ethan sitting at a patio cafe table, leaning in toward each other, faces soft, the distance between them charged with unspoken things. The caption read, "Isn't this Judge Ethan Walker? With the woman he just cleared in a high-profile fraud case?" Within hours, it spread. Talk shows debated judicial ethics. Opinion pieces sprouted like weeds. Did Judge Walker cross the line when justice gets personal? Is this why Amara Johnson walked free? The worst part wasn't the accusations. It was the familiarity of the spiral. She was no longer Amara the fraud. She was now Amara, the judge's girl. Nadine called within minutes. "We need to talk about this. Now." They met at Amara's townhouse. The anger on Nadine's face wasn't directed at her. It was fear dressed as fury. "You know how this looks," Nadine said, pacing. "They're going to say he was biased, that he bent the system for you." "He didn't," Amara said, stomach churning. "He followed the law. He was harder on the prosecution than on us half the time." "That doesn't matter," Nadine replied. "The courts have ethics boards. The media has no ethics at all." Amara sank under the couch. "So what do I do? Stop seeing someone who treated me like a human being when the world treated me like a criminal?" Nadine's shoulders sagged. "I'm not saying that. I'm saying you need to be prepared for a second storm." It arrived faster than the first. A judicial conduct inquiry was quietly opened. Ethan's past rulings were scrutinized, his political leanings dissected. Online, people insisted Amara had bewitched him, seduced him, manipulated the system with her sob story. She latched onto the one man who could save her. This is why men in power shouldn't deal with pretty defendants. She's playing the long game. The misogynoir was suffocating. One comment sliced deeper than the rest. She couldn't pull herself up on merit, so she used a man in a robe. Amara read it 3 times, bitterness burning her throat. That night, Ethan called. "Amara," he said softly, "are you okay?" "No," she answered. "Are you?" He huffed a humorless laugh. "I've been better. There's an inquiry. It's not formal discipline, but they want to review the timeline of our interactions." Her chest tightened. "I don't want to be the reason your career gets torn apart." "You're not," he said firmly. "The reason is a system that believes judges should be robots instead of humans, and that a black woman couldn't possibly deserve both justice and love without cheating somewhere along the way." The truth in his words hurt more than any lie. "Maybe we should slow down," she whispered. Silence hummed on the line. "If that's what you want," he said eventually, his voice carefully even, "I'll respect it." "What I want," she said, tears stinging, "is a life where loving someone doesn't feel like a crime." "Then we'll build that life," he replied, "even if we have to take it 1 inch at a time." But she could hear the strain, the pressure pushing in from all sides. Colleagues questioning his judgment, friends questioning hers, a chorus of strangers casting them as Scandal's sequel. In the days that followed, they saw each other less, not because the feelings dimmed, but because the world's gaze was heavy, and Amara had spent too many months already carrying weight she didn't choose. She poured herself into consulting work for nonprofits and small clinics, work that mattered, work that didn't involve cameras. Ethan buried himself in case files and hearings, as though he could prove his neutrality through sheer volume. Yet even with the distance, they remained tethered. A text after a long day. "You eat yet?" A late-night message. I argued with a colleague about you today and didn't regret it. A simple line on the hardest nights. Still here. Still on your side. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't easy. It was love. On trial. Cross-examined by strangers. Objected to by systems. Questioned by the very people who needed their stories to remain tragic, not transformative. And still, beneath the noise, something stubborn and quiet refused to let go. Because for the first time in a long time, Amara was beginning to understand. Surviving the world's judgment was one thing. Choosing, despite it, to reach for joy. That was its own kind of rebellion. Freedom was one thing. Reinvention was another. For weeks after the inquiry into Ethan began, and the media frenzy calmed only slightly, Amara found herself hovering in an in-between place, no longer hunted, yet not quite restored. Her name was clearing, yes. Logan was behind bars. Chelsea and Carlos were rebuilding what was left of their battered lives. But Amara? She was a woman suspended between collapse and rebirth, standing barefoot on the ashes of everything she had been. It was in this quiet, fragile interval that the call came. "Miss Johnson," the voice said, crisp but warm. "I'm Reverend Sharon Carter, director of several community clinics in Southwest Atlanta. We heard what you'd been through. More importantly, we heard what you tried to stop before it destroyed so many of us." Amara straightened. "How can I help you?" "We'd like to hire you," Reverend Carter said simply. "We need someone who understands how to protect clinics like ours from fraud, corruption, and predatory companies. We need someone who's survived the worst of it. Someone who can see the red flags before the rest of us even know they exist." The words settled on Amara's heart like gentle hands. "You want me to... what exactly?" she asked. "To build something new," Reverend Carter said. "A framework, a system, an ethical backbone that companies can't twist. We want you to become our ethics architect." The title struck deep. Ethics architect. Not a fraud, not a scandal, not a cautionary tale. A builder, a protector, a woman designing structures from the same steel she was forged in. 2 weeks later, she walked through the doors of a small office space the Clinic Alliance had rented for her. Windows full of sunlight, walls bare, desks empty, a blank canvas, a place where her past wouldn't suffocate her and her future could finally take shape. Daria, her first hire, a brilliant young analyst with degrees in finance and public policy, bounded toward her with a stack of folders. "Ms. Johnson, here's everything you asked for. Risk assessments, clinic audits, historical compliance breakdowns. Just call me Amara," she said, setting her bag down. "We're building this together." Daria beamed. Soon others joined. Analysts, legal minds, community advocates. Each person carried their own scars from systemic failures, and each brought a fierce desire to prevent others from falling through the cracks. The work consumed Amara in the best way. She drafted frameworks, built compliance matrices, mapped out what ethical oversight should look like when the priority wasn't profit, but people. She became a guest lecturer at Georgia State, then Emory, then Morehouse. Students packed auditoriums to hear her speak about courage, about red flags, about trusting instincts in rooms where power tried to disguise itself as wisdom. Clips of her speeches went viral. Integrity is not angelic. It is defiant. Sometimes the whistleblower is the only person in the room who remembers the truth matters. A system is only as strong as the people willing to challenge it. For the first time since her life imploded, the internet wasn't mocking her. It was listening. But even as her new life took shape, the inquiry into Ethan hung like a shadow in the background. One evening, after a speaking event, she walked into her office to find Ethan sitting in a chair, waiting. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes held a tiredness she had never seen before. "Amara," he said, rising. She locked the door behind her. "Has there been a ruling?" "Not yet," he exhaled. "But I came because I didn't want distance to become the norm. Not if you don't want it to." She moved closer. "I never wanted distance. I wanted fairness. For both of us. He nodded. And you were right. We both needed space to breathe. She studied him, the careful way he held himself, as though bracing for disappointment. "How are you?" she asked softly. "How are you?" he countered. They both laughed, but the laughter held an ache beneath it. Ethan moved beside her desk, tracing the edge of a whiteboard filled with her notes. "This is incredible. You built all this in weeks?" "Pain is a better motivator than ambition," she said. "But purpose, that's better than both." He turned toward her. "I'm proud of you." The words struck her like warmth after a long winter. "Thank you. And I'd like to be part of your life again," he said quietly. "If you'll have me. I don't care what the headlines say. I care about you." She inhaled slowly, letting his sincerity wash over her. Then she reached for his hand. "You already are," she whispered. Their reconnection wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was gentle, intentional. Two people choosing each other with clarity instead of fear. Some days, Ethan visited her office during lunch breaks, offering legal perspectives on the ethical frameworks she drafted. Other evenings, she visited his home, where they cooked simple meals and talked about everything except courts and corruption. The world still watched them, but with less venom than before. People were growing tired of blaming her. The scandals had moved on. Logan's plea deal dominated the news cycles now, not her existence. But even with the noise fading, the quiet scars remained. One night, Ethan brushed his thumb over the back of her hand and murmured, "You don't have to be strong all the time." She leaned into him, letting herself rest for the first time in years. "I know," she said, "but strength is the only thing that ever kept me alive." Ethan pressed a kiss to her temple. "Maybe now you can let it keep you alive without carrying it alone." By the time winter came, the Ethics Architect Initiative had secured grants, partnerships, and national recognition. Clinics across Georgia implemented systems Amara designed. Whistleblowers reached out for guidance. Nonprofits asked her to speak. Politicians requested policy briefings. Her mission had outgrown her pain. One evening, Daria burst into the office, breathless. "Amara, you're trending." Fear spiked through Amara's veins. "For what?" Daria turned her phone around. A clip of Amara standing in front of a room full of medical interns was circulating widely. In it, she said, "What happened to me didn't break me. It rewired me. And now I build systems no one like Logan Hale will ever slip through again." The comments weren't cruel. They weren't mocking. They were grateful, inspired, hopeful. Amara pressed a hand to her chest, overwhelmed. This time, the world wasn't defining her. This time, she was defining herself. She was no one's scapegoat now. She was an architect, a protector, a woman who had taken her pain and transformed it into blueprints for something stronger. And this time, she was building a future where she, and everyone who came after her, could finally stand without fear. 2 years after the day her life was shattered and slowly rebuilt with trembling, determined hands, Amara Johnson stood backstage at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., adjusting the lapel of her tailored white blazer. She looked calm, poised, a picture of quiet strength. But beneath her ribs, her heart hummed with something deeper. The awareness that she had crossed a threshold she never imagined she'd reach. She wasn't just someone who survived scandal. She had become someone who shaped systems. Someone people listened to. Beyond the curtain, hundreds of scholars, policy leaders, students, and journalists filled the auditorium, waiting for her keynote at the National Conference on Ethics in Public Leadership. Her name wasn't trending as a scandal anymore. It was trending as a thought leader, a blueprint maker. Daria appeared beside her with a stack of notes. "Do you want the final draft?" Amara shook her head. "No, I spent too long reading scripts written by other people. This one comes from me." Daria smiled. "Then they're about to hear something unforgettable." As Amara stepped toward the stage entrance, her phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. "Proud of you. I'll be in the wings when you're done. Always." A warmth spread through her chest. Soft, steady, grounding. She typed back one word, always. The stage manager opened the curtain. Ms. Johnson, whenever you're ready. The lights hit her face first, not harshly, but like a gentle spotlight, guiding her forward. The audience rose in applause, something that once would have terrified her, something that once felt like scrutiny. Now, it felt like acknowledgement. She reached the podium, exhaled softly, and began. When I was 28, I thought my future was a straight line. Graduate school, corporate finance, leadership, excellence. I thought that if I worked hard enough, if I stayed moral enough, if I carried myself respectfully enough, then my path would sharpen into clarity. She paused, scanning the room. Faces leaned in. But life, her voice softened. Life is not a straight line. Life is a spiral. And sometimes it spins you so violently that you forget who you were before the fall. The room stilled. I became a headline, she continued. A meme. A warning. The world took pieces of me and rearranged them into something I didn't recognize. Someone they wanted to blame. A murmur of recognition rippled through the audience. Too many knew the feeling of being mislabeled by power. But here's what happens when your face is plastered beneath a false accusation, she said, voice strengthening. You start to realize the system wasn't built to protect truth. It was built to protect convenience. A few heads nodded, professors, activists, lawyers. And when I survived, she continued, the question wasn't, how do I rebuild the life I lost? The question was, how do I build something better? Something that cannot be twisted by people like the ones who tried to break me. She let the silence breathe. That's when I stopped being a headline and started becoming a blueprint. Her words flowed like water, steady, reflective, growing stronger with every truth she laid bare. She spoke of ethics not as a checklist, but as a living organism. She spoke of communities harmed by silent corruption. She spoke of whistleblowers who lost everything and those who saved lives. She spoke of the necessity of courage when institutions fail. And she spoke of designing frameworks that outlast any one corrupt executive. By the time she ended, with a reminder that transparency isn't a burden, but a promise, the entire room erupted in applause so fierce it vibrated through the floor. People stood. Some cried, many recorded. She had lived through hell. Now she was teaching others how to prevent it. After the event, Ethan met her in the backstage hallway. He wasn't in a robe or a suit, just a soft gray sweater and that warm, steady gaze she had come to depend on. You were extraordinary, he said softly. Amara laughed, breath trembling. I didn't shake, did I? You shook, he said, stepping closer. The room, she felt her cheeks warm. You're biased. I'm observant. Their hands brushed, an accidental touch that lingered. The inquiry into Ethan had ended quietly months earlier. A formal review found no ethical violations and concluded their relationship began only after her legal matters were resolved. But the ordeal had carved something into both of them, a shared understanding of what it meant to be misjudged, scrutinized, exposed. Yet here they were, still choosing each other. You know, Ethan said softly, every time I watch you speak, I think, you were never meant to remain a headline. You were meant to write a new rule book. She smiled. Blueprints are more my style. I like the architect theme, he teased. It fits, she said. Because you're rebuilding the world? No. She stepped closer, touching his arm. Because I'm rebuilding myself. In the months that followed, Amara's blueprint expanded. The Ethics Architect Initiative received federal funding to scale across multiple states. Universities integrated her case into business ethics curricula. She advised congressional committees on corporate transparency. Her book reached its third printing, adopted by several MBA programs. Students quoted her lines online. TikTok creators stitched her speeches with encouragement videos. She wasn't trending because she fell. She was trending because she rose. Because she made rising a practice. Because she turned the tools that once hurt her into foundations that could hold others. One evening, as she sat in her DC office, watching a new team of interns work on their first clinic analysis, she felt it again. that quiet stirring of recognition. She had become the things she needed when she was drowning. A compass, a safeguard, a blueprint for others who might one day find themselves crushed by the weight of lies. Her past was no longer a cage. It was architecture. And every day, she built something stronger than what had been taken from her. Something designed not just to survive, but to change the world that once tried to break her. The news reached Amara on a quiet Tuesday morning, the kind of day that felt almost ordinary. Emails, meetings, a half-drunk cup of coffee cooling on her desk, until her phone lit up with a notification that pulled her straight back into a past she had worked so hard to outgrow. Inmate Logan Hale eligible for parole review next month. The article's headline read, "Eligible." The words sat in her mind like a stone dropped into still water, sending out ripples that touched every bruise he'd ever left behind. For a while, she just stared at the screen. His name no longer made her flinch the way it used to. Mostly, he existed now as a warning she wove into lectures, an example in case studies, a cautionary tale, not a living threat. She had built a life where he was peripheral, not central. Background noise. But prison didn't erase him. Time hadn't changed the fact that he had once held her future in his hands and tried to crush it for sport. A soft knock sounded at her door. Daria poked her head in. "You saw it?" Daria asked gently. "Yeah," Amara turned the phone around. "He's up for parole." Daria's jaw flexed. "They'll ask you for a statement." "I know. You don't owe them one." "I know that too," Amara said. "But I might owe one to the people he hurt." The district attorney's office called the next day. "Ms. Johnson," the woman on the line said, "I'm Assistant DA Monique Turner. I'm overseeing the parole review preparations in Logan Hale's case. We're reaching out to victims and key witnesses to gather impact statements. You are under no obligation, but your voice would carry significant weight." Victim. The words still sat strangely on her tongue. She had never liked it. It sounded too passive, too small, like something had simply happened to her instead of something she had fought her way through. "What would you want me to say?" Amara asked. "The truth," Monique replied. "How his actions affected you. How his decisions reverberated beyond you. Whether you believe he's safe to release." Safe. Logan had never been safe. Just charming enough that people mistook danger for brilliance. "I'll think about it," Amara said. "Take your time," the DA replied. "We'll need any written statement within 3 weeks." They hung up. Silence settled back over the office, heavy and intimate. Amara stared at her reflection in the darkened window. Older now, stronger, softer in some places, harder in others. A woman who had walked through fire and come out with both burn marks and armor. She thought of what it would mean to speak again, to reopen wounds she'd spent so long stitching closed. Before she could sink too deep into the thought, a timid knock sounded at her door. "Come in," she said. A young woman stepped inside, one of their newest interns. Bright eyes, neat braids, notebook clutched against her chest. Her name was Zara. "Ms. Johnson, do you have a minute?" Zara asked. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Zara hesitated, then closed the door behind her. I need your advice. Not as my boss, as someone who's been where I'm scared I might end up." Fear flickered in her eyes, raw and familiar. "Tell me," Amara said gently. "I'm doing part-time work at a startup," Zara began, "health tech adjacent. They love that I'm interning here with you. It makes them feel legit. But I've been noticing things." Her voice lowered. "Invoices split between accounts to hide loss. Services billed twice. An executive joked about creative documentation. At first I thought it was just messy. But now," her throat tightened. "I'm scared," she admitted. "If I say something, I could lose my job, my recommendation, my entire career track. If I don't," she swallowed, "if I don't, I'm part of it." The room blurred a little around the edges for Amara. She saw herself years earlier, standing in Logan's office with a report in her hands and dread in her stomach. Asking questions, not liking the answers. "What does your gut say?" Amara asked quietly. That it's wrong, Zara whispered. That if I ignore it, I'll become someone I don't recognize. But I've Googled your name, Ms. Johnson. I've read what they did to you. I'm terrified of becoming a hashtag before I even graduate. The honesty cut straight to the bone. Amara rose and came around the desk, taking the spare chair beside Zara instead of sitting across from her. Look at me, she said softly. Zara met her eyes. They tried to destroy me, Amara said, for telling the truth. And for a long time I thought maybe I'd been a fool for speaking up. But if I hadn't, if everyone stayed quiet, Logan would still be out here, stealing, lying, hurting people who couldn't afford to lose anything. Zara's eyes glistened. Courage doesn't mean you're not afraid, Amara continued. It means you feel the fear and decide your integrity is worth more than your comfort. That sounds hard, Zara whispered. It is, Amara said, which is why you won't do it alone. Zara blinked. What do you mean? I mean we're going to document everything. Carefully, professionally. You won't go to HR by yourself. You won't go to regulators by yourself. My team and I will help you structure this the right way. A small, shaky breath of relief left Zara's lips. You'd do that? Even after everything you've been through? Especially after, Amara replied, because I know what it feels like to scream into a void and hear nothing back. You're not going into the dark alone. Not on my watch. Zara's shoulders sagged, tension draining from her posture. Thank you, she whispered. As she left, Amara glanced back at the article about Logan's parole hearing, still open on her screen. This was the legacy he never intended to create. He had taught her what unchecked power could do. She had become the counterweight. The parole hearing was held in a bland room with fluorescent lights and walls the color of old paper. It smelled like coffee and resignation. Amara hadn't wanted to attend at first. The idea of seeing Logan again, older, caged, still dangerous, twisted something in her chest. But in the end, she went. Not for closure, she had already found that without him, but for clarity. For the record, she sat in the back, flanked by Monique and a few other victims. A clinic director who nearly lost her facility, an elderly patient whose treatment had been delayed due to budget freezes, a nurse whose career was derailed by internal investigations when she raised concerns. Logan entered in a plain prison uniform. The shine was gone from his hair, but the arrogance remained lodged firmly in his posture. Even in handcuffs, he tried to make the room orbit him. He spoke of regret in language so polished it could have been written by a PR team. He mentioned Amara by name only once, to imply they had both made mistakes. Her jaw clenched. When it was her turn, she walked to the front slowly, feeling every gaze on her. The parole officers, the guards, Logan's narrowed eyes. Ms. Johnson, the board chair said, you may share your statement. She did not look at Logan as she spoke. She spoke to the board, to the record, to the version of herself who once believed justice was just a word carved above courthouse doors. Logan Hale didn't just falsify numbers, she began. He falsified reality. He reprogrammed people's trust. He taught an entire company to believe that success justified anything, including sacrificing the lives and reputations of decent people. She took a breath. I lost my job, my savings, my home, my name. But I survived, and I rebuilt. Many others weren't as lucky. Some lost careers they never regained. Some lost their health. Some lost faith in institutions that swore to protect them. She finally turned her head, just enough to meet Logan's eyes. Prison didn't make him honest, she said quietly. It just took away his stage. And even from behind bars, he's still trying to rewrite the story so he's the tragic hero instead of the villain. Logan's lips curled, but he stayed silent. I'm not here to demand suffering for suffering, Amara continued. I'm here to tell you that a man who still believes he is the victim of his own choices is not a man ready to re-enter the world with power. And make no mistake, Logan Hale will always chase power wherever he can find it. She finished. The room held its breath. Later, when the decision was read, parole denied, With strong recommendations against reconsideration in the near future, there was no surge of triumph in her chest, no jubilant satisfaction, just a quiet, heavy finality. On her way out, one of the board members stopped her. "Miss Johnson," he said, "I've sat through hundreds of these hearings. Very few people manage to speak without venom. You could have wished him the worst. You didn't." She shrugged lightly. "I don't need him to suffer to be free. I just need him not to be able to hurt anyone else." Outside, the sky was gray, but open. Amara stepped into the cool air, inhaled deeply, and felt something settle in her bones. The man who had once rewritten her life was staying where he belonged. But her victory wasn't that he remained in prison. Her victory was that she no longer did. The National Mall glowed gold in the late afternoon sun, the reflecting pool catching light like liquid fire. People wandered past in quiet clusters, tourists, joggers, families. Yet the world felt strangely still around Amara as she walked beside Ethan, their hands brushing occasionally, softly, like the warmth of something long awaited but never rushed. Washington, D.C. had become home in ways Atlanta never truly could, not because it erased her memories, but because it honored them. Here, she wasn't the woman who survived. She was the woman who built. Ethan glanced over at her as they neared the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. "You've been quieter than usual today," he said gently. Amara smiled faintly. "I've been thinking." "That's usually dangerous." "Not today." They climbed the steps, stopping halfway to look out over the water, the city, the line of monuments that carved history into stone. Amara folded her arms, breathing in the soft hum of evening. "2 years ago," she said, "I couldn't walk outside without cameras chasing me. My name was a battleground. My life didn't feel like mine." "And now?" Ethan asked. "Now," she said softly, "I'm free. And I'm building something bigger than anything they tried to take from me." Ethan reached for her hand, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. "I hope you know," he murmured, "your legacy isn't how you fell. It's how you stood back up." She looked at him then, really looked. This man who had seen her worst days and still believed she was worth knowing, worth fighting for, worth loving. "Maybe," she said, "but legacy isn't about me anymore." Her work had taken on a life of its own. The Ethics Architect Initiative had grown from one rented office to a national network with branches in 7 states. Clinics and nonprofits all over the country used the framework she wrote. Universities taught her methodologies. Corporations consulted her team to audit their practices before scandals erupted. She didn't just fix broken systems. She redesigned them. And because her story had resonated online, she became a voice for every person who'd been silenced, scapegoated, or brushed aside in the shadows of powerful men and failing institutions. Her book became a bestseller. Her speeches were clipped and reposted by millions. Young women sent her messages daily. "You taught me not to be afraid to speak up. You helped me leave a toxic job. You inspired me to study ethics law." Amara kept every message. They reminded her that her scars had become a map, not for her, for others. As evening deepened, the lights of the memorial flickered on. Ethan guided her to the upper landing, where the city stretched beneath them. "So," he said softly, "have you made a decision?" She knew what he meant. They'd spoken about it for months. Late nights, quiet mornings, long walks, children, family, a future shaped not by trauma, but by intention. "Yes," she whispered, "I have." Ethan's breath hitched, just slightly. "And?" Amara took his hands in hers, grounding herself in the warmth she'd fought so hard to earn. "I'm ready," she said. "Maybe for a child. Maybe through fostering. Maybe adoption. Or maybe through the young people I mentor every day. But I'm ready to build a life bigger than pain. A life that grows." A slow smile spread across Ethan's face, steady and reverent, as though he were witnessing something sacred. "We'll build it together," he said. She rested her forehead against his. "We already are." Later that night, back in their townhouse, Amara lit a single candle on her desk. Her inbox overflowed with new partnership requests. invitations to conferences, letters from students. She moved them aside and opened a fresh document on her laptop titled Legacy, a Framework for Courage. She began typing, her fingers steady. Words flowed, truths she had earned, not inherited, lessons carved from battles she had never asked to fight, foundations shaped from scar tissue and steel. I once believed legacy was something inherited, she wrote. Now I know it is something built, one choice at a time, one voice at a time, one act of integrity in a room full of silence. She paused, letting the words settle, then continued. My name was once a headline. Today, it is a blueprint. And tomorrow, it will be a bridge for someone who needs to cross the same fire I walked through. As she finished the paragraph, Ethan stepped into the doorway. Ready for bed? He asked softly. She closed her laptop. Yeah, I am. Before turning off the light, she glanced at the candle, its flame steady, bright, unafraid, a symbol of what she had always been, even in the darkest chapters. Not extinguished, literally. As she lay beside Ethan, drifting towards sleep, she felt it, the quiet truth she wished someone had told her when her world first collapsed. Survival is not the end. Survival is the beginning of legacy, the beginning of purpose, the beginning of choosing joy without apology. And as she finally closed her eyes, she knew with absolute certainty. Her story wasn't ending. It was just clearing space for the next chapter. If Amara's journey moved you, if you felt her strength, her pain, her victory, don't leave her story behind. Like, comment, and follow to stay connected. There are more stories coming, stories of resilience, justice, and the fire we carry forward.